Today, it's well understood that having a quick, safe way to transport those at the very highest levels of the government is exceptionally important to those in charge. This, surprisingly, is a relatively new concept in the United States, however, as with the exception of special events or wartime conditions, many of the presidents throughout the first half of the United States' history found their own way from point A to point B without security or taxpayer-funded transportation. But while secure forms of transportation gradually became a priority, early on, a surprising form of multi-use transportation came into the president's official fleet. The title of the executive yacht, or presidential yacht, has an extensive history across many ships. And today, we're going to look at how the US Civil War gave way to allowing the president his own vacation yacht, as well as the reason why it's no longer used. This is the story of presidential yachts, and this is Learn Something New. As the American Civil War raged on, General Ulysses S. Grant had the Department of War charter a steamboat to transport him back and forth from shifting battle lines to Washington, D.C. But it wouldn't be long before the ship, called the River Queen, was co-opted by then-President Abraham Lincoln. It wasn't just used to transport the president, however, as on February 3, 1865, it would serve an important role as a neutral meeting area for the Union and Confederate leaders to talk. On board the 181-foot-long River Queen, Lincoln would meet with a delegation representing the Confederate government to discuss the terms of a potential end to the Civil War. While these talks would fall through, Abraham Lincoln really took a liking to the ship and would continue taking official presidential trips on the vessel, even being on board just 2 days before his assassination. This wasn't a presidential yacht. Its official use was more for General Grant than anyone else, but Lincoln's trips on the ship set a precedent that would lay the foundation for what was to come. In 1880, Rutherford B. Hayes would adopt the USS Dispatch, a ship from the United States Navy that had been used for special assignments, as his yacht, and this would continue to be used through President Gerald Ford. But in 1893, an exception was made, as President Grover Cleveland announced he would be taking a vacation. It was supposed to be a 4-day fishing trip, spanning from New York to Cape Cod, but that was only what the press were being told. In reality, this would be far from a relaxing excursion, and there would be no fishing. You see, as Cleveland had begun his second term in the White House, he noticed a bump in his mouth that was quickly diagnosed as cancer, with his doctor saying that it's a bad-looking tenant and I would have it evicted immediately. Surgery needed to be performed soon, but Cleveland was worried about how the health scare would impact public sentiment in the country, especially since there was such a big stigma attached to cancer at the time. Thinking that the presidential yacht normally used might raise some red flags, Cleveland borrowed a friend's yacht called the Onita. Once at sea, a team of 6 surgeons performed the risky surgery that would normally take hours in just 90 minutes, removing the tumor along with 5 teeth and a portion of the president's jawbone. Importantly, however, they left his signature mustache untouched, a special request from the president, who felt if anything outwardly looked different upon his return, people would immediately become suspicious. After one of the surgeons spoke to a journalist just 2 months after the procedure, the secret mission would be reported on by journalist E.J. Edwards. But the president denied everything and managed to discredit the reporter with a smear campaign so fierce that he was forced out of the industry. It wouldn't be until 24 years later that he would be vindicated, when the last 3 witnesses to the operation would verify its legitimacy. Something notable about the first presidential yachts is that they were fairly strictly transportation ships. Meetings had been conducted on them, and some had been used for leisure, but they weren't constructed with luxury in mind. That is, until the next era of presidential watercraft. The early 1900s saw the presidents moving away from many of the previously used ships. Instead, the USS Mayflower was brought on to serve as the executive yacht. The USS Mayflower, originally belonging to millionaire Ogden Goelet, was 275 feet long, with a crew capacity of 150 people, and even had a 30-person dining room table. Goelet had used the ship to entertain royal dignitaries for the last year of his life, passing away after only owning the luxurious ship for just over a year. But with its onboard library, 6 bedrooms, and marble bathtubs, the US Navy decided it would be a great ship to purchase for Admiral Dewey as the Spanish-American War began. Though after the war ended, it would be transferred to the president. Theodore Roosevelt was a big fan of the ship, and he would often use it to get away from the White House, taking trips away from DC with his family. but even he knew it had greater potential than just as a means of vacationing. In 1905, he brought dignitaries from both Russia and Japan on board the ship, mediating a peace between the two nations, something that would earn him a Nobel Peace Prize. But even after Theodore Roosevelt had left the office of the presidency, the USS Mayflower would continue servicing those who came after. Every president that stepped aboard the USS Mayflower was struck by the ship's grandeur, with Calvin Coolidge stationing a chaplain from the Navy on the ship so that he could go out on cruises on Sunday mornings without skipping church. But as the Roaring Twenties gave way to the Great Depression, the public outcry over government lavishness grew louder. In response, Herbert Hoover had the Mayflower decommissioned. Yet, that didn't spell the end of the presidential yacht. Hoover himself used a smaller ship, the USS Sequoia, to go fishing on. It was a ship that President Franklin D. Roosevelt would start out with before switching to the USS Potomac, a larger ship that was equipped with a special elevator that allowed the president to move between decks when wheelchair-bound, even using the ship to take him to a World War II meeting with Winston Churchill. From here, presidential yacht excursions tended to be largely recreational, with Truman hosting poker games on the Sequoia, and JFK having what would be his last birthday celebration on the presidential yacht as well. But Lyndon B. Johnson often preferred to use the USS Sequoia to meet with legislators and generals. Nixon would expand upon this, taking more than 100 trips on the Sequoia, whether it was to meet with other world leaders like Leonid Brezhnev or to stay out of the public light during the Watergate scandal. But eventually, the era of the presidential yacht would come to a close. When Jimmy Carter entered office after his 1976 presidential win, he carried with him his campaign promises to end the established luxury and extravagance associated with the presidency. Upon discovering that the USS Sequoia was costing the tax-paying public $250,000 each year to maintain, he wrote a memo to his Secretary of Defense saying, "Despite its distinguished career, I feel that the presidential yacht Sequoia is no longer needed," subsequently putting it up for sale. Thus, the presidential precedent was set that the expenses in transportation should be focused on efficiency of travel and the safety of those in the highest office in the United States of America, leaving us with things like the President's Limo, the Beast, Marine One, and Air Force One, all heavily fortified and all solely used to get the president where they needed to go as quickly as possible. Thank you for watching Learn Something New. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel so that you can see more videos like this one. If you would like to learn more about the White House, check out my video on the history of the building itself, and if you want to learn more about presidential protection, consider checking out my video on the history of the Secret Service. And as always, if you want to further support the channel, consider checking out the channel Patreon, linked below in the description. I cannot thank the patrons enough who continue helping make these videos possible. Your support is greatly appreciated. But as always, I'll see you in the next one.